I know math is not the Conservative Party of Canada's forte.
And the budget will balance itself.
So,
So far, we've seen 750,000 children and families across this country benefiting. Who's benefiting? Obviously the children, but also the parents. And I would argue predominantly the women who, as we have seen in the data, are increasingly being able to re-enter the workforce. Not only that, but
Mr.
as
Chair,
was pointed out,
I just need to point out this. It is my time, Mr. Chair.
Point of order.
It is, so she's not answering the question, and it is my time.
Me a chance to.
Parents are giving up their jobs as hundreds remain stuck.
Ferrari, please.
BC mother says lack of childcare could leave her homeless.
I have a point of order.
So, as in the first session, but particularly here, we need to hear the answers. The questions matter as much as the answers.
Thank you,
can we
Mr.
hear the answers?
And again, I'll remind all members, you direct your questions through I, the chair. If you fail to do it, I'll move on to the next questioner. Ms. Ferrari?
Point of order,
through
Chair.
you, Mr. Chair.
Point of order. This is, I think, the first time I've been at your committee. So when the chair's speaking, do other people have to stop talking? Is that your rule?
Yes.
Okay, because you were speaking, but Ms. Ferrari continued. So I just encourage you to, so that we can actually hear what's happening.
Thank you, Mr. Angus, for reminding. I will go to Ms. Ferrari to conclude her question, then I'll give the minister the opportunity to respond. Ms. Ferrari?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And yes, I am being assertive and fairly aggressive here because you have families. Parents are giving up their jobs as hundreds remain stuck on daycare waitlists in Newfoundland. BC mother says lack of childcare could leave her homeless. These are the articles in 3 days that I have. Families are in chaos and distress through you, Mr. Chair. So I will ask one last time, and I just want an answer, Minister, on behalf of the parents and families that you say you represent and you want to offer fairness. These operators are closing down. Please, with all due respect, answer them directly. Why are you not allowing provinces who are asking you in desperation, your own Liberal MPs, who say, I want you to include private operators? Why are you not doing that?
Thank you, Ms. Ferrari. Madam Minister, I'll give you the opportunity to respond.
Thank you very much, Chair. The agreements that were negotiated with every province and territory are intended to build a public system in which, as I mentioned, 750,000 families are benefiting from to date. And by the time these agreements finish in 2026, we'll have seen 250,000 new spaces created. At no point in history have we ever seen the expansion or the creation of spaces at this scale. And what does that translate to? That translates to more families being able to return to the workforce. Sure. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Ferrari. Madam Minister, we'll now go to Mr. Coteau for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
How many scandals do you think Trudeau has had? I have another video over here showing how many, and it is a lot. And I think shame needs to be brought back into Canada because he has no shame anymore. And I think it just trickles down to everyone underneath him. And that's what's really frustrating about Trudeau. And as far as an election is concerned, obviously there should have been one a year ago. But do you think it'll really be in October 2025? Because his steam, like all he has to do is smile and for the camera, go on his vacations. There's going to be a new love in his life coming up, probably, because he has to, because he needs to take attention away from himself. Anyway, let me know in the comments what you think. Let's go back to the video.
And thank you to the minister for joining us today. Minister, I want to start by saying congratulations. The child care plan in my home province of Ontario, but across this country is really revolutionary. And it's taken decades of talk for many different governments to get to this point. And this, you're the minister responsible for a file that's really changing lives in this country. So I want to say thank you and congratulations. In my home province of Ontario, there has been some challenges. And those challenges, and I've met with stakeholders, including parents, folks from organized labor, people who work within the sector, providers. And the big challenge that they have is that Ontario seems to not be fulfilling its end of the agreement. And in fact, I read an article back in February that talked about how from when the Ford government took power to now, there's $85 million less being spent on childcare from that very government. And to make things even worse, the $10 billion plus that has been allocated to the province is not being spent on the specific file. So my question to you is Ontario fulfilling its end of the bargain, and is the money being spent in the province?
Thank you very much for the question. And I'm also a member of Parliament here in Ontario, and can certainly attest to the fact that first of all, it's important to note that the province of Ontario, as did every province, signed on to this 5-year agreement with expectations and outcomes which they're accountable to achieve in order to, of course, continue to work with us and receive the funding that we are providing. It is a partnership. We do need to work together to make this successful, but ultimately childcare is provincial jurisdiction. And so when our colleagues point out some of the challenges, I implore us to continue to work with the province, to work with your respective MPPs in your area to raise these challenges. You're very right. In Ontario, we've funded $10.2 billion over 5 years. In the most recent year, our funding does increase year over year. It increased by 17%. But we're seeing that the province of Ontario has not yet entered into a long-term funding formula with the operators here on the ground in Ontario. And in fact, this is very much stifling the operators' ability to consider adding spaces, consider growing, which is what we need. And so the work that I continue to communicate, and I know many of my colleagues are as well, is that we need a province that is willing to fulfill their commitments and to work collaboratively to ensure that these spaces are created. Here in Ontario, there is a commitment by the province to create 86,000 new spaces by 2026. And so we need to get to work already. Admittedly, I mean, it is changing lives here in Ontario. Families are saving on average $8,500 each and every year per child. I get to speak to families across the country and here in Ontario, and the stories are incredibly impactful of what this translates in a young family's lives and these savings. We've seen in Ontario 300,000 kids benefiting to date, but we need to keep pursuing, keep doing the work to ensure that those spaces get created and that Ontario gets a funding formula in place that works for operators.
Thank you so much for the answer.
Mr. Coteau,
yes,
could you lift your boom a little? The sound.
Is that better?
Okay.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Minister, for that answer. One of the other programs, and again, these are programs that are national. They're new. No government in recent decades have brought forward new national programs at this rate, but the student nutrition program for this country is a huge game changer. When we have young people going to school who don't have the right type of nutritional value in their food, it can affect their behavior. It could impact their cognitive abilities. It can impact performance, attention. When you're out there talking to people in the sector, what are the biggest gains we'll make by having a program like this nationally across the country?
Thank you very much. And through the chair, I think you're absolutely right. As we are moving forward with this National School Food Program, we will see an additional 400,000 children receive food at school. And what does that mean? What does that translate to? That means kids are able to focus on what they should be focusing on, right? Focus on learning, focus on their social interaction, having lunch with their friends. You know, I recall a recent conversation actually here in Ontario with a teacher who was sharing how there's a little boy in her class who always is off to the side at lunchtime because he doesn't have a meal to eat and he's embarrassed. So he misses out not only on obviously the health and the well-being of being well-fed and being able to learn, but he also misses out on the social interactions of being able to sit with his friends at lunch and have conversation and form friendships. So there's incredible gains. Obviously, when we invest in our children, we're investing in our future. And the National School Food Program is poised to ensure our kids are set up for success.
Thank you, Mr. Coteau.
Thank you, Minister.
Madam Minister, your time is up. Madame Chabot pour 6 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Welcome, Minister, and your team. Welcome to all of you once again here at HUMA. I can't resist making a brief introduction when I hear people talking about Canadian childcare policies. As you know, we've said this and we've said it many times in the House. It's a societal choice. Yes, it is complex for the federal government to tell the provinces to create spaces because the federal government's not the one creating the spaces, it's the provinces. It's up to the provinces, as is training of educators and the ratios and whether it should be public or private. Each province makes its choices, and there are provinces who have never made the choices that Quebec made 25 years ago and more. Quebec is a leader, and the whole federal government narrative about creating spaces and how it's good for family and women's coming back to the labor force, that's all true because it's the narrative of our model. So if anyone doesn't like what's happening in their province, well, do it. It's a social program. Invest. Well, the federal government, you're talking about a model, but the federal government is not the one who's going to have a universal childcare program. You said it's going to benefit 750,000 children. Thank you. What? I imagine that you're including Quebec in that figure, which should not be the case. So if you remove Quebec from that, how many spaces have been created? Thank you very much for your question and for your work.
Correct in stating, well, much of all of what you've said, frankly, in that Quebec is very much a leader. And when you look to the success of Quebec and the work that was done more than 25 years ago in creating the system there, we've looked to Quebec and to the successes that have been achieved as we've built out this system. And particularly, you see the impact on women's participation in the workforce in Quebec.
I know math is not the Conservative Party of Canada's forte.
And the budget will balance itself.
So,
and all that that has been able to accomplish. The numbers that I had quoted, 750,000 children that have been, their families that have been able to access the system, it does not include Quebec.
I want to know about the figures outside of Quebec.
Yes, so that is a number that does not include Quebec. As you, I'm sure know, our agreement with Quebec is an asymmetrical agreement. And we do not have, that data to include.
Microphone. You've said that family is the jurisdiction of Quebec and the provinces, education as well. So you've announced something, I think it's even in your electoral platform, about money for food food nutrition plans. Is it your intention? You know that in Quebec there are already food programs for children at school, and this has been the case for a few years now, because this is the choice of Quebec or the provinces to do this. You can deplore the fact that there are children needing this, but the federal government is deciding to give a hand. Well, with your bill that we're going to be seeing later, are you going to recognize the same thing? That we're leaders and that you will give us the right to withdraw with full compensation?
Thank you. Merci pour la question.
Thank you for the question.
We are quite fortunate when you look across the province. There's a number of provinces who have done some great work when it comes to national school food, or school food, within the province. I looked at PEI. I had a chance to visit not that long ago, and they've got an incredible system on the island in which children are receiving hot foods for each and every school day for lunch. Having said that, when we are proceeding, obviously, with the National School Food Program, we will be entering into agreements similar to what we have done with the early learning and childcare with each province and territory. That work has not yet begun for obvious reasons as we move forward with the budget, but we will engage in those conversations in the near future.
J'avais une question.
I had a fairly straightforward question. There are already existing measures in Quebec. I don't know about the other provinces, so much the better. So you're deciding to make a contribution to an area of our jurisdiction. School education is very clearly Quebec and the other provinces' jurisdiction. Are you prepared to say that we deserve to have the right to refuse with full compensation?
Those discussions obviously will transpire in the coming months and over the summer, with an aspiration of reaching agreements very quickly, as we'd like to, of course, ensure that children are able to have access to food at school as quickly as possible. Again, it's, I respect the comments and would agree that Quebec has done some great work, but we'll enter into those discussions in the near future.
Madame Chabot. Mr. Angus, 6 minutes, please.
Chair, certainly New Democrats have been very supportive of a national school program. We know in our regions children who go to school without food. 31.5% of children in Kenora right now living in poverty. Those children are not getting proper food to go to school and nurture their brains. What concerns me is you've mentioned a couple times your figure of 400,000 people, students. Where did you come up with that number?
Through the chair, thank you for the question. And undoubtedly, we all agree, I think, that ensuring kids at school have access to healthy, nutritious food is incredibly important. The number that you're referring to, the 400,000, is an estimate based on the work that's already underway in provinces and territories already. So there's a number of various programs, whether it's through Breakfast Clubs of Canada, Healthy School Food Coalitions. There are groups that are doing this work already. So there is some data that has been able to be accessed as to what's happening in order to give us grounds as we look at $1 billion and we look at the population, the school-age population across the country, to be able to decipher that we expect that it will be approximately 400,000 additional children over and above those already receiving food supports at school.
Because right now there's over 3 million children in grades 1, kindergarten to 8. The 400,000 would fit the cohort of grade 6 and nobody else. So my question then is, so is this going to be a stopgap? And then what about regions that are doing programs that are paying for it? And then a nearby region that isn't? Are you going to compensate? Like, is this going to be a universal program, or is this a series of stopgap measures?
Mm-hmm. So you're quite right. There is approximately $200 million across the country that is being spent currently by provinces and territories in school food programs. So you could expect, obviously, as we roll out our contributions to that, we would expect the current levels of investment by province and territories to be maintained, and that our dollars are additional to augment and to increase the number of children that will be reached. So all that to say, we fully expect that as we enter into these agreements with provinces and territories, ultimately it will be up to the provinces and territories how they administer on the ground within their province. But we will be moving forward with a policy that's informed by consultations that happened over the last few years, and then, of course, negotiating those agreements with respect to the financial contributions as well.
Thank you for that. One of the things that I spent most of my political career dealing with is the huge inequity faced by First Nation children, particularly in the far north. Our greatest resource in this country isn't oil, and it's not gold, and it's not copper. It's this generation of Indigenous children, and they've been failed at every single level. So I noticed when I was very excited in 2017 when the government announced the Indigenous Early Learning Childcare Plan, yet we waited 5 years. In 2022, they announced a framework. I mean, 5 years is an enormous time in the life of a child. And now the communities I'm talking to are still waiting. So why is this delay in place in communities where these children have greater needs, I would argue, than pretty much any other section of the country in terms of childhood education and opportunity?
Through the chair, thank you very much for that question. I can address the piece about the moving forward piece, because obviously the National School Food Program is inclusive, and we are working. One of my counterparts, of course, Minister Haidu, is very much engaged in this work, and there is a portion of funding that will absolutely be supporting Indigenous populations, Inuit Métis populations. So that work will be moving forward as we negotiate the agreements that I mentioned.
Sorry, I'm talking about the early child care.
Oh, sorry, I apologize.
Strategy.
Apologies.
That was announced, waited 5 years to
Got
say
you.
there was a framework, and it's still not really out the door. That's what I'm concerned about.
Apologies. I thought you were on to the school food program. With respect to their early learning and childcare, yes, you are correct. We do have agreements in place and are working with the leadership, Métis, Inuit, Indigenous leadership, on rolling that forward. In the spirit of nothing for us without us, the work does continue. We've seen some progress, undoubtedly. Particularly, I think, to
sorry,
recent...
but what's the holdup? Because in any community I've ever been in, they're begging for this money. It doesn't sound like they're sitting around, their bureaucracy's holding up. Why is it not getting out the door?
Yeah, I would suggest that it is getting out the door. Perhaps it is not as fast as we would all like it to happen. But it is moving. The conversations are ongoing. We have strong relationships with the Indigenous leaders, Métis and Inuit as well. And most recently, one of the big challenges I would suggest is infrastructure and building new centers, whether that be an entire new center and the infrastructure dollars required for that, or looking to license home centers as well. We do have progress on that front with respect to infrastructure agreements, to have funding rolling specifically to fund new builds, and that work continues collaboratively.
Thank you, Mr. Angus. Now, Ms. Gray for 5 minutes. And I just want to remind again, I'll hold all the members to the same standards. Direct your question through the chair.
Thank you,
Ms. Gray.
Mr. Chair. Through you to the Minister, thank you for being here. Illicit drug overdoses are now the leading cause of death among youth in British Columbia, aged 10 to 18, according to figures by BC Court.
I know math is not the Conservative Party of Canada's forte.
And the budget will balance itself.
So,
service, and this is obviously heartbreaking. As the Minister for Families and Children, have you spoken up in your Liberal cabinet against the failed drug policy experiment your government approved of in British Columbia?
Through the chair, thank you for the question. I'm not going to disclose cabinet conversations for obvious reasons, and respectfully here to speak about items within my portfolio and mains and estimates today.
Well, Minister, in your opening statement, as the Minister for Families and Children, you talked about policies that make life better for families in Canada. So my questions are quite relevant. Have you been pushing back to ensure that your government rejects support for illicit drug legalization in Toronto and Montreal?
Thank you. Through the chair, as my colleague would know, Minister Sachs has been leading on this file quite very well from my perspective. We've heard from her a number of times, both in the House and throughout. And I think that I'll continue to rely on her leadership as we move this forward.
Through the chair, if any province requests what BC did with respect to the legalization and open use of illicit drugs like fentanyl and crack, as the Minister of Families and Children, would you support this?
Thank you very much. Again, through the chair, I appreciate the question. Again, I will refer the fact that this is work that is being...
And is Chrystia Freeland doing a good job? She is the finance minister and the vice president of Canada. And she is the one that just looks like her head is just spinning when she talks. It's always like trying to drag it on, never answer a question. And maybe they should have this I thought they would always do this. When they ask a question, say, do you mind after you finish it, if you give me 5 seconds to say if you answered it or not for our listeners, because it is so frustrating. Everything is an infomercial with both of them. And that's something that I think needs to be stopped. Maybe the whole Constitution and the human rights and everything needs to be rewritten again after those two are gone, because this is just frustrating what they're doing. Anyway, let's go back to the video.